Hi, I'm Max Gaulden with Grandma's Genes and MyYDNA.org, and this is simply YDNA. It's a part of the DNA Basics Learning Center at Roots Tech Connect. We're going to talk about what YDNA is, what YDNA test can tell you, matching and discoveries that you can do from a YDNA test, where to test and post your results once you've tested. So what is YDNA? Well, YDNA at its simplest form in biology lesson here, it's one of the two sex chromosomes located in the nucleus of every single cell. Biology lesson is over now. YDNA is inherited through the patrilineal line of fathers, and it goes back for thousands of years. So that's father to son, father to son, father to son, father to son. I could go on and on and on. It's exclusive of girls. So no daughters inherit YDNA. It's kind of like a boys' club. Now, what's the difference between paternal and patrilineal? I get this question a lot. The paternal side of a family is everyone on your father's side of the family, and that includes males and females. And we just learned that YDNA is not inherited through any of the women in a family. It's only the males. So the patrilineal line is the father's line, and it goes back for thousands of years. And for something that goes back that far, anthropologists and archaeologists can use this information. They can use data that they find from archaeological digs or sociological studies about tools that are found or bones that are found or bits and pieces of people or a community or a village. But for genealogists, we have to move that timeline up to something we call the genealogical time frame, which is about the time that we started using surnames and keeping documents about those surnames. Now, there's discussions that go on. Some people say that surnames started in 1066, absolutely. Some people say it was around 1300, and some people say it was between 1300 and 1500 that we started using surnames. But either way, it's very important to know that it's the documentation of those surnames that creates the genealogical time frame. So going back before 1066 really is problematic for having written documentation about who we are related to. And the documentation that we use as genealogists, we work to create accurate trees using marriage license, court records, census records, journals, letters, newspaper articles, birth, marriage, and death certificates. We use documentation to work out and fill out our lineages and our family tree. And it's a part of a toolbox that DNA has been added to recently in the past like 10, 15 years. But using DNA to work our genealogy is just another part of the toolbox. DNA in and of itself cannot prove anything. What DNA can do is it can confirm the paper trail that we have for our family that goes back for thousands of years. And what can a YDNA test tell me? Now, I'm not going to go into the particulars about how to get a test or how the testing gets a sample, but I will tell you a little bit about what it is. It can tell you information about your makeup, your identity, your origins. It doesn't tell you anything about your ethnicity. It can tell you about your origins. So this is my dad's autosomal DNA test, his family finder test results from Family Tree DNA. And it's a pretty picture with blobs of color on it that shows that my father is 55% Central Europe. He's 43% Irish, and it's 43% Northeastern Ireland. And he is a smidge of England, Wales, and Scotland. So it really does fit the picture that I know of my family research, that we are basically Irish. I'm not sure about the the Central Europe part yet. I haven't gotten that far, but I will someday, I hope. For a YDNA test, we look more at the mutations that happen to our DNA over time, and we identify those mutations or changes by giving them a name, a haplogroup. So my dad's haplogroup is RM269, and it happened about 25,000 years ago. It's a very common haplogroup, and many men from the northern, that have descent from northwestern Europe, have this haplogroup. This is the path that my father's haplogroup took out of Africa. So you can see the proverbial atom here, and each one of these dots here is a point at which my father's DNA mutated over the many thousands of years that it took for it to finally get down here to RM269. So every time the mutation changes, a mutation happens, then the name of the haplogroup changes to go with the mutation. And this is the final place that my dad's Y37 test at FTDNA gives. But there's tools out there that can be used that are publicly available to anyone and everyone. I happen to be accessing them through YDNA.org. This is my dad's kit page. And on that, there are a couple of little tools in the yellow here that you can use. So I use the haplogroup predictor to see if I could find out, based on my dad's Y37 test, without spending the money to buy a bigger test, to see if I could see anything better about my dad's haplogroup. And using YSeek's haplogroup predictor, it predicted that my dad was probably R1b-U106. And using that tool, I see that RU106 is several steps below RM269, and the mutation that happened with it was about 4,800 years ago, which is way better than 13,000 years ago. So I was able to see that, and I'll show you the trail. So this is my dad's RM269 trail out of Africa, and these are the changes that happen when I do the predicted haplogroup of RU106. It puts him smack dab in the middle of all of those blobs of color on his autosomal DNA information. So like I said, I haven't gotten back that far. It would be cool to be able to go back further and find out where all of his North Central Europe information came from. The other thing that you get when you get YDNA ancestral origins reports is you get information about the other testers. So this is actually my dad's origins information according to his YDNA. 37 marker test. He has 2 matches, one from Scotland and one from the United States. And these are self-reported locations for people. And I'm thinking that my dad's reported location is England, which probably needs to change to Scotland or Ireland. But this is reported by the user or the tester. The match total is a total number of matches for a specific country. The country total is the total number of people with YDNA chromosomes that are in the FTDNA database. And the percentage is the percentage of the country of origin compared to the total number of the country database listed. And the comments section is just a place where people can fill in their comments. Matching and discoveries. I've made several discoveries. I made more than several discoveries using YDNA. I think it's an incredibly effective tool. And one of the biggest ones to know about when you do any kind of DNA testing is finding someone who matches you, who matches your DNA, who knows their genealogy, can tell you about your genealogy. This is a mantra that I say every time I give a presentation. If you know someone else who knows their genealogy, they can tell you about your genealogy. When you send your DNA test off for processing, a DNA testing company takes that information and looks at all of the people in their database to see if you are like or not like the other people in that information, in that testing information. And they take the information and they organize it into a way that you can see who is closest related to you, and it goes down in degrees out until the people are not as related to you. For me, I figured out after 40-something years of research that my last name, Gaulden, is actually a derivative of Gaulden. I had rumored that, I had found that, I hadn't thought about it, but yep, it was shown. These are my actual YDNA results for my father. And you notice there's 2 Gauldings. There's actually, the other guy is a Gaulden as well. He's related through Lucius Leroy Gaulden. I'll tell you really quickly about the information here on the matches page. This is FTDNA's matches. The genetic distance, we're going to get into that a bit more in a little while, but this is how the difference between these testers and my dad is measured. The earliest known, the name is their real surname. The earliest known ancestor is the earliest known ancestor for that line, so Gaulden or Lucius Leroy Gaulden. The YDNA haplogroup, and then the date. Over here you can see you can email your test match. You can get a tip report, which is a percentages report of the possibility that you and this specific tester might match. It is based on the law of probabilities, and it is a very rough estimate. You can also see if you've left any notes about this, and I specifically have written notes about who this guy is. I've worked out the family lines for all 3 of these gentlemen. But my first look at this, I noticed this. There is a little pedigree button here, which was huge for me. I pressed that and got so excited. I found this guy's family line, and I researched the other family lines based on the earliest known ancestor information they had given us, given to FTDNA, and I found that 2 of the guys are related to my father through John Matthew Gaulden, Sr. of New Kent County, Virginia. And one of the guys is actually related 1 generation back to John Gaulden, born about 1665 in possibly England. We don't know. But according to the autosomal DNA results, it should be Scotland or Ireland. And it's fascinating. So I was able to confirm my DNA trail and my genealogical trail back to those Gauldens based on my dad's YDNA and the pedigrees of the people who have also tested. And the accuracy in sourcing is very important to make sure those pedigrees are correct. So moving on to the genetic distance, that is a little bit hard to understand or hard to put in your bonnet. Genetic distance for YDNA talks about the number of mutations that happen between a tester and a match. So this fella is a 2 genetic distance match. That means that there were 2 changes or 2 mutations in the DNA between the earliest known ancestor and this guy and my father, and 3 for the other. And genetic distance, this is the total definition that family tree DNA gives. It's the term used to describe, and I'm going to make it a little bit easier to understand and say it's genetic distance is a term used to describe the number of differences or changes or mutations between matches. So I know what their mutations are, and since I know our most recent common ancestors, I know that John Matthew Gaulden, born in 1705, that there have been 2 to 3 changes in DNA since his birth. We've been talking about sources and things to do when you're working your DNA. A big one is creating a citation for that. If you're using DNA in any form, in any kind of work that you're working on, you need to have a DNA confirmation citation. And WikiTree has a really good help section on creating DNA citations for all kinds of DNA. This particular one, of course, is for YDNA. It talks about the paternal relationship. Paternal relationship is confirmed through a Y chromosome DNA test. I mentioned the names of all the testers, all of their kit numbers, their relationship to my father. One of them is a sixth cousin once removed. And then I mention all the information from FTDNA, that the probability that the two share a common ancestor within the last 12 generations is 97.14%, and then within the last 8 generations. So it's very, very specific, and you need to have that kind of information on any of your DNA confirmation in your work. One of the great things about using YDNA is that it's a part of our surname. So if you get a YDNA test for your brother, your uncle, your grandfather's brother, your grandfather's brother's great-grandson, whoever you get tested, you can turn to surname studies or group project, DNA group project studies to help you find out more information about your family. WikiTree has Templeton Surname Study, which is one of my surname studies, and I've also connected the Templeton DNA Group Project at FTDNA with a Templeton DNA Group Project at WikiTree. And what that does is it allows me to keep track of pedigrees and information that are associated with the DNA information. Here is the French DNA project that you would look at for the French DNA name, the French name at mitoydna.org. And here you notice that it doesn't really have a lot of information about pedigrees or anything. And here is the information from the family tree DNA, where I have done some of the due diligence to group some of these people by haplogroup and by their specific ancestor. Let's see, my dad is not on this list, but he's in another part of it, so he's just not listed. So it's interesting. You could see that information, but to fill out the information, to give the project color, you really have to turn to a third-party site. So where do you test to get a YDNA test? Right now, there are 2 testing companies available, Family Tree DNA and YSeq. Are both available for doing YDNA testing. There are several different levels of DNA testing. The ones that are highlighted in blue are the current levels. Y12, Y25, Y67, and Y500 are historical tests that you really can't get anymore. If you're testing at YSeq, instead of getting a Y111 test, you would get a Y116 test. So they're very similar, but different names. You can see that I've clicked here that the Y37 is like the entry level. It's the least expensive test. And testing with FTDNA, those samples that you send in are kept for 25 years, so you can check back to see if it's if you want to upgrade it. The 111 test is very high for family connections and deeper haplogroup, and the expert level is the Y700 test, which is much more expensive. So do a screenshot of this of this slide and hold on to it. I'm fine with that. There's also some third-party DNA testing databases. mitoydna.org is one of them. Family Tree DNA by far has the largest DNA database for YDNA. mitoydna.org is different in that you can upload any test to it from any of the companies. And way back when, Ancestry DNA used to do testing, and you can upload to them. WikiTree does YDNA analysis and stuff, but you enter only the test information for WikiTree. What I say is get a YDNA test and find out about your family and add more information to your gene pool. The water's fine. Just dive in. I hope I've answered everybody's questions. If not, we'll see a way we can figure out how to answer them. I hope you've learned, and I certainly enjoyed giving this. Thank you very much for being a part of Roots Tech Connect.